accelerating, braking, cornering. Superficially, these are the core fundamentals of driving an F1 car, but it's how these elements and countless more are weaved together that separates the great drivers from the merely very good. Welcome to Driving Style Secrets. Hello and welcome to Driving Style Secrets, where we take an unapologetically deep dive into the techniques of Formula One's greatest drivers. Now, if you're new to the Race Members Club or you're listening to this episode in our F1 podcast feed or watching on YouTube, we've already made 2 seasons of this show, so this is our 3rd year. Those are all exclusively for members, and we urge you to check those out if you haven't already. Now, in the first series, we covered the modern greats, so Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell and Piastri. Then season 2, we moved on to legends of the 90s, so Senna, Prost, Mansell, Schumacher and Hakkinen. So season 3, this series will only be available on the Race Members Club with the exception of this first episode. We're kind of bridging the gap between those 2 eras. So we're going to talk about 21st century greats. And we're going to start off with a driver who ticks that box in so many ways. He's raced in 23 out of 27 seasons in the 21st century. Still going strong. Fernando Alonso. I'm Ed Straw. Joining me is Mark Hughes, my regular partner in crime for this series. You've probably written more about driving styles than any F1 journalist. I'm probably not far. Well, maybe a long way behind on the league table, but not too bad in terms of ranking. Give me another couple of decades, but yeah, and obviously you've raced extensively as well in the distant past, and
not at this level, but the laws of physics are the same, and you sort of get some sort of insight into what drivers are talking about, and when you're observing them, you sort of get a good inkling of what they're trying to do with the car.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not the same, but it is the same. The kind of amateur driving career. So, episode 1, we normally get into our foundational arguments and that kind of thing, but it is really important because when we're talking about driving styles, it's important to understand that these aren't absolutes that we're talking about here. It's a broad toolkit to understand what drivers are doing or might do or tend towards. Yeah. But it's not this is always them hammered into that precise window. Yeah,
exactly. It's a bit like with tennis players, but you can observe it much more easily with a tennis player, the different styles and the different techniques and the different situations that favours one player over another. And it's very similar with drivers. But it's not as you say, it's not an absolute. They all use variations of the different techniques that are available to them. Some favour one more than another. Others are more adaptable, and you'll see them use several different styles according to the type of corner, the grip of the track, the circumstances, the way the car is. So it's not a black and white given, but you see a pattern with enough repeats. You see what they're good at, and you talk to the engineers, and you begin to build a picture over the years of observation and talking to them. So there's a lot to get into.
Yeah, and that adaptability is so important for all of these drivers. I'm sure we'll get into that again during the series. But yes, obviously there's so many different ways to study it, aren't there? We watch trackside, study onboards, and there's obviously more and more onboards. You basically got access to all of the onboards all of the time. Now speaking to engineers, speaking to drivers, rivals, and it's kind of a patchwork, isn't it? You build all of this up and then going through all of those individual race weekends.
And GPS now as well.
Yeah, exactly.
With the throttle traces and braking and So there's more tools available now to analyse it than there's ever been.
Yeah, which gives you more information, but the perverse thing is the more data and information there is and information streams, the harder it is to kind of really tease out the signal and the detail. But that's what we try to do on this series. So, Mark, Fernando Alonso. And I had to say, Fernando Alonso is the driver that we keep getting asked to do. People were very disappointed he wasn't in the first or second series. We promised him. And he is an absolutely fascinating driver. So give us the lowdown.
Absolute. He's a sort of talisman of this era of drivers that we're talking about. And we're bridging at least 2 eras, maybe more. But incredibly adaptable. We talked just before about adaptability. he's probably more adaptable than any driver that we've seen in this century. He can get a tune from any car balance and any car trait and any type of tyre. And it's not a precise nibbling up to the limits and sitting there in a way somebody like Schumacher or even Verstappen can do. It's more of a rodeo ride. And if you look at the peaks of his speed, it would be very U-shaped. It would work, be very quick over a wide range of corners and circumstances, but the absolute peak would maybe be a slight, and we're talking tiny margins, but wouldn't be quite as high as those guys on a one-lap basis. But because he's so adaptable, he can work when there's a problem with the car. He can work his way around it probably better than anyone we've ever seen. And I remember when this first became apparent, it was at Renault. On one occasion, the electronics had gone haywire at Silverstone. I think it was 2004. And the systems were just absolutely all over the place. And it took him about half a lap to work out how to drive it. And within 2 laps, he was back to his previous times. And his engineer, Pat Simmons, was at the time the tech guy there, and he says, I have no idea how he did that. Absolutely no idea. And then I was at Hockenheim, where he got something lodged beneath a barge board. And it changed. They could measure the change in aero balance, and it was 18% it had moved towards the front, which should have made the thing undrivable. And again, he was lapping within 0.3 within a 4 or 5 laps. And Simmons said any other driver would have just parked out. He would have come in the pits and said, I can't drive it. And then
that bit of debris fell out, didn't it? And he just snapped straight back.
And so he just continued and finished where he was going to finish. So, yeah, he's incredibly good at that. He's got the most, when you watch trackside, going into somewhere like the S's in the Circuit of the Americas, he's got the most amazing coordination between steering and throttle, and just is sort of dancing between the two, or like a sort of ballet dancer sometimes. You see it at Monaco, at Tabac. Yeah, I've seen him do it there, where the car just didn't want to turn in, and he was using the brakes in an extreme way. And he can be quite brutal with the car, but only when it's needed to be. And he'll sort of get the nose down on this car that just didn't want to turn in, would be very, very reluctant to surrender any momentum, and then would just sort of chuck it in and then just dance it through. The same lap after lap, and he is better at this improvisation, I think, than anyone I've ever seen. He's just absolutely amazing at it. And that's just talking about his driving style, and there's also his racing style as well, but that's not quite what the focus of this is. But yeah, he's also the best I've ever seen at being aware of where he is in traffic, and he's amazing first laps. We saw as recently as the last Grand Prix, Japan and China before that. Those amazing first laps where he places the car absolutely perfectly and seems to have a 360-degree awareness of where everybody is around him. So he's the best I've seen at that as well.
Yeah, always thinking multiple corners ahead on first laps. And he's not averse to the old sneaky trick, the Sochi trick, when he wasn't that impressed with what people were allowed to get away with by running off track. And he thought, well, if we can do that, I am going to do it. Very, very.
And he telegraphed that he was going to do it as well, didn't he?
He was very proud of it. It was, well, I said that. I said this is going to... And that's another part of Alonso as well. But I think that rodeo style you referred to, his driving style generally it's ludicrous, really. It is so difficult to live on that edge the way he does. Yeah. Just the fact you can do that so consistently, and he is really consistent as well, to be able to do that and not be... You could see a driver who does that but often falls off and is a bit of a crasher. Mm-hmm. We've seen cases of that sort of driver, but Alonso isn't that. Yeah. And the feel it requires, that strong front, he seems to, because he feels very much through the front tyres and the steering. Yeah. That's absolutely key to him. He said if he hasn't got that feel, then he's basically dead. I think that's the phrase he used. That's sort of the one non-negotiable he's got in a car. But within that, any kind of balance. And obviously, in terms of, because it is a reactive style, but
very.
he is so quick in terms of interpreting that feedback that he actually becomes as good as proactive, because he's responding to it the moment the start of that signal is there. And normally reactive drivers are a bad thing, but for him, he's closed that gap so much. The sensitivity, if you could measure all the physiological things that go into that, must be extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because he's got so used to driving like that, he's incredibly attuned to those little cues that let him know that he's about to get this happening. And although you say he needs a front end, and he says he needs a front end, when he doesn't have it, he still can find a way of getting the feel from it. So we saw with those rearward biased Renaults that really had fantastic traction coming out of a turn, but generally had understeer. He would just lean into the understeer to a ludicrous extent and just whack the steering on so that he could get that data point immediately to get it over with as quickly as possible, and then just lean into that understeer. And then, it got the whole business over with very quickly. And that, because they were his first years in Formula One, people thought this was some unique driving style. And that was how he drove a car. But as soon as he got into other cars, you saw, no, it's not. He can drive all sorts of different ways. That was just the best way to drive that particular car. And I recall Giancarlo Fisichella, his teammate, just being absolutely stunned by how he could drive it like that, because he said this car just doesn't have a front end. He can always find a way. That's the thing with Alonso.
And the astounding thing is about that sort of style. And he has used the sort of understeer. It's not his default style, as you say, but there have been times when he's done it and he deals well with a car that's understeering. There's a point where if you're doing that, where the balance changes, and anyone who's driven a car at speed will have experienced this. You have understeer on, maybe you crank on more lock and try and counterbalance it that way. But there's a point where there's a transition, and you end up sort of doing that.
Yeah, because the front suddenly finds its grip and it comes in suddenly, and you've got oversteer all of a sudden.
But he's able to deal with that. He
knows when that's about to happen and doesn't put the lock on. Yeah,
and that's probably something you can liken to. We often talk about the rear instability that the likes of Max Verstappen, Michael Schumacher before, and various great drivers could deal with. That's kind of Alonso's version of that, almost. And again, profoundly difficult to do. And there's so many examples of this. There's one example, I don't know why it stayed in my mind because it's fairly trivial, but I remember watching one of the practice sessions at Suzuka around about 2019. Hülkenberg was at Renault, I remember that, because Hülkenberg had a spin in the S's and there was a crosswind there. And then Alonso had almost exactly the same moment with the same wind, but he was able to catch it because just that razor sharp, I shouldn't say razor sharp reaction, but again, that understanding what's happening almost before it's happened is a phenomenal tool to have. And most remarkably, it still seems to endure, because if there has been any decline now, it's very shallow. It's not a great deal.
I'd agree. And I think there's two things to do with that. It's not very much to do with the speed of his reactions. It's to do with the sensitivity and the feel and how he's feeling the cars with all these things, and therefore not necessarily age related. And I think the other thing that shouldn't be underestimated is just how much he pounds around the track in a go-kart whenever he's got enough time. That's just what his default activity is. So when he's not being a racing driver, he's pounding around a racetrack on a kart.
It's the Verstappen thing again, isn't it? It's that pure enthusiasm, just driving.
Doing it, and is very, very pleased with himself when he's done a sequence of 10 laps and they're all within half a tenth of each other, and it comes to the next Grand Prix, and that's what he's talking about. He's done a sequence of this on his kart.
He does like telling it.
He does, but
it's the extraordinary thing with him, isn't it? And we're going beyond John Star. I've never known a character who is so accomplished and so brilliant at what he does, yet has such a strong need to tell everyone. And it's great, and it's honest, but it tells you something about the psychology.
Well, Muhammad Ali, maybe.
Well, yeah. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, similar sort of thing. And in most, that would just seem nonsensical, but he's earned it. You can't.
Absolutely. You know, it's probably true what he's telling you.
Yeah. Sometimes he exaggerates a bit. He went through a phase when he was struggling. He was struggling when the car was just not competitive, and it would be one of the great Grand Prix drives, best qualifying lap ever, and he just loved saying that because there's so much frustration. But I would say Alonso is one of the best bad car drivers of all time. When I say bad car, I mean what you would
ill-balanced.
Exactly. So you think about the Minardi started out in 2001, the 2012 Ferrari, particularly early in the season, the Aston Martin early this season, the McLarens. And when cars are really tricky, that's when you see that yawning chasm open up with teammates. Remember Massa in 2012. Massa's a very, very good Grand Prix driver. Very, very underrated, I would argue. But he was all at sea in that point. And there's not many drivers, I think, who can do that to that sort of level because of that ability to, if the car doesn't fundamentally have what he wants, he can induce it, because you've got to remember all of these things, throttle, brake in particular. It's moving, shifting things around. It's a dynamic beast. It's not a solid block, is it? And the capacity to do that is astounding. And a lot of it must be done subconsciously as well, because although he can think his way through it, and everyone says he's very, very intelligent in terms of the way he operates, but it obviously comes to him so quickly and so easily. He doesn't have to actively do it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think also what you see, because he's so quick at finding a way around whatever the limitation of the car is, that as the car improves through a session, through qualifying, say, or the track brings the balance to him, he doesn't always find as much lap time as everybody else is finding, because they've started out at a lower level. And that's another thing he loves telling everyone. Yeah. So I think it is mainly that, but I think it probably is, when you're comparing it to the ultimate one lap guys, I think there is probably something in the fact that he's that sort of U-shaped peak just doesn't give him access to the absolute pinnacle of one lap pace that the more precise clinical styles that you see from certain guys can give.
He's given this quote a few different times. He said that, I might be a 9.5 out of 10 on everything. There might be people who are quicker than qualifying than me, or quicker at this or better at that. And he is not the driver that I would pick if you had a driver to do a qualifying lap for your life or whatever.
No.
Alonso wouldn't necessarily be the first one to race, different. But he's a great example that when you're looking across all sorts of sports, the greats, they tend to have that sort of profile in terms of all the skills they're doing, because you get plenty of competitors who, might have a much more spiky sort of profile, and that they're brilliant at one particular thing, but they can't back it up. But Alonso's just there across absolutely everything, and that is reflected in the race, the adaptability, the consistency, the relentless pace. He's shown it time and time and time again, hasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it's the shame of it is the circumstances of his career that don't align properly with his level. Two world titles greatly undersells him, but that's just a function of how the sport works. And there's that great statistic that if you spread just 8 points differently across his seasons, he'd have 5 titles, which, would be about right.
That's a statistic Fernando Alonso likes talking about sometimes as well.
Yeah. I don't know who made it up for, who worked it out first, but it's oft repeated, but it tells you it's quite a good stat, because it does tell you something fundamentally true.
Oh, absolutely, and he could have so many more titles, and it's just bad luck. 2007, 2010, 2012. There's 3 straight away. Yeah.
So he's not immune to mistakes, but he very rarely makes them. Very rarely makes bad mistakes in the car, but he's probably made a few bad misjudgments outside of it, and I think that ended up defining his career.
Yeah, he's interesting out the car because he's very intelligent, and those who've worked with him have said that. I wonder whether he's almost one. I wouldn't say it's a problem to be too intelligent for a racing driver, but I wonder if there's a bit too much thinking sometimes going on, because if you're thinking too much, that combined with everybody's got their own sort of characteristics, sometimes seeing ghosts, which has accelerated the problems. These I don't think are flaws that cost him greatness or anything, but there's definitely a lot going on, but sometimes that can lead you into a place where you've overthought things and you feed into your own situation in a negative way.
Also, it's also the type of thought, because he's very shrewd, cunning, street fight, all those cliches, which serve him so well in the car. But I think when applied outside the car in a more sophisticated environment, sometimes work against you.
There was a wonderful quote. Ben Anderson, our colleague, did a fantastic feature for Autosport in about 2015, 2016 called The Real Alonso, which I worked with him on. I think I'd commissioned him to do it, and he went through all aspects, did loads of interviews with people like Andrea Starr. One of the people he spoke to was Pat Simmons, and there was a quote in there where he said, well, he's very intelligent as a racing driver in many ways, but he's not always so intelligent in other aspects of life, which I always thought was getting to the heart of it.
Given that it's such a political environment, once you're outside of the car, I think certainly in his early careers, once he'd left Renault, McLaren and at Ferrari, I think there was some moves that he could have been smarter with.
Yeah, and even he will admit some of those as well, actually. Starting to think about certain emails and all that sort of thing.
Exactly. Just one of it. But it's not a lack of intellect. It's just probably a misjudgment in the type of environment and how, because you got to think of, with all these guys, you got to think of the background. You got to think where they came from. And he came from, his dad was an explosives expert in a quarry, and they managed to scrape together enough money to keep him racing in karts. It was just a region of Spain that was, there's not a great deal of commercial activity, or it's not a very sophisticated part of the world, and that's where he comes from, and how he's got on and how his family of instilled values in him is probably, it's probably still runs through him. And
a version of that part of the world, the kind of every sort of region will have the slightly stereotypical mindsets and cultures, but there's something to this sometime, and that's kind of the us against the world sort of mindset, which I think he does carry them. We've all got some of these sorts of things in our background.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what was at play in those early years.
Weather prowess again.
Good.
He's an interesting driver, isn't he? Because I can straight away think of a number of fantastic wet performances. I can also think of some mistakes, crashing at Fuji, crashed at Spa one year in the wet. So again, a slightly mixed bag. Still much more good than bad, but
again, he wouldn't be the guy I bet my house on if there was a wet race.
Yeah, exactly. And
but he'd probably be in there among them fighting for it. But
probably the one circumstance in a raceway I think you would the one circumstance you'd probably bet heavily on him is if he's in a hobbled car or a damaged car. I think that Azerbaijan drive in the damaged McLaren when he got thumped was that 2018, and he came back somehow struggled to get it back to the pits, had to bounce it off the pit wall when coming
to get it into the pits.
And just that sort of dogged determination, but very adaptable in that regard. But I think he's such an interesting example, because I suspect the relative lack of success, and he's still a two-time world champion, that's still a lot of success, I think will often get counted against him. And yes, you have to look a little bit at the bigger picture and what role did he play in that, but he's also been genuinely unfortunate, because there's some decisions at the time that seemed perfectly sound. You can't really fault, but I do wonder. I always think of the 2007 Interlagos Alonso. He seemed surprisingly happy for someone who just lost a world championship, and maybe he just thought there'd be many more in the future. So perhaps time may have changed that sort of view. But I'd argue he's almost a unique driver in terms of that broadness of skill set, in terms of what he does. I can't think of another. Maybe it's almost a modern iteration of a Gilles Villeneuve type figure who could provoke the car. It's much more big picture, because it's a broader canvas you could paint on as a driver there, move the way it extends to which it moves around and all these things. Maybe Alonso's the sort of high downforce version of that.
Yeah, to an extent, I think so. But that, I think, just is all round the way that broad frequency, if you like, of technique that he can bring to bear is the most outstanding thing about him. And when you combine that with his racing brain, the ability in the brain in the car, I think it's absolutely, you would just not, if you just not fancy your chances, would you? No matter how good you were, if he was in an equivalent car to you, you'd want to race him, but there'd be something in the back of your head saying, I've really got a job on my hands here.
He'd definitely be the person you wouldn't want in your mirrors.
Yeah.
And even at the level I've raced at, there's some people you don't want behind you. So, that person, they're just a nightmare because they're so good.
Yeah.
You know that. And it's not necessarily sheer speed, but they're just so on top of the whole racing side of things. But again, another win that tends to get forgotten, actually, Fuji 09, because that followed the Singapore, Fuji 08, sorry.
08, you mean,
because that followed the Singapore controversy. It was obviously the second win that he got that season, but it's forgotten about. But if you remember, there was all the nonsense at the start with Ferraris and McLarens, and you ended up with Kubica leading for BMW Sauber and Alonso behind. And just the extent to which Alonso was on top of just the strategy. He was basically saying, right, we'll do this, and this. And the pit was like, oh, all right, yeah, okay. And of course he won. And the car was quick enough to do that as well. But I mean, he's talked about that, having that capacity when he's driving in a race to do things. There's all sorts of stories about, Pat Simmons tells a story about the Canadian Grand Prix where he set fastest lap in a refueling era race when you were really pushing, and he was chatting away on the radio all the way through the lap, but still this is an ultra fast lap. So that mental capacity is really, really important to so many of these things that we've talked about, because even if you're problem solving because you've got a bit of bodywork stuck in your car or whatever, you can think through that while still doing, which is the ultimate symptom of that.
Yeah, it's just showing how little bandwidth has been taken up actually driving the car, how naturally it's coming to him.
Yeah, he's an absolutely remarkable driver. So there's going to come a point, probably in the not too distant future, because while he's been enduring, he's not going to be in Formula One forever, where we're going to have to work out where we put him in the pantheon of greats. And it's such an interesting question, because I'm not sure there's any driver who will be who should rightly be so highly regarded among the greats in terms of just the sheer volume of races he didn't win, because there's people he raced against who've got, Hamilton's got vastly more titles, Sebastian Vettel, many, many more wins for Max Verstappen, etc. And some of those will be in and around him or even ahead of him. But he doesn't have the sheer bludgeoning weight of numbers to back it up.
No.
But despite that, he is absolutely going to be right up there. I think straight away you're saying, well, he's in the top 20 easily and probably very, very deep into it.
Yeah, I'd say so. He might not have bludgeoning numbers, but in terms of calibre of performances, he's got a bludgeoning number of those. When you put into perspective the machinery's been
probably nobody's got more brilliant 7th, 8th, 9th places than him, I would imagine.
True, yeah.
It is interesting actually, because I've done a lot of driver rankings, driver ratings, and you go through, you try and get on any given weekend, right, how much did they get out of the car? And it's rare you see Alonso not getting the most out of things. There's occasions where he gets a bit irritated, and we've talked about on other podcasts for the race. Sometimes he does get a bit belligerent and starts to undo things a little bit, but that's quite rare. There's specific windows where that happens. But for the most part, he's just getting everything out of the car. And that's why so many of these people who've worked with him, Pat Simmons and Andreas Stella, really, really high-end engineers, hold him in the highest possible regard. And it's also why, even though that has, to an extent, impinged some of his choices of where he's driven, there's still teams have clamoured for his services, knowing the perceived baggage that he brings.
Yeah, I think his final sign-off, I think we've got to assume, is going to be with Aston Martin. It's just a question of when. It would be wonderful to see him in a competitive situation at some point, just so he can go out and say, yes, told you it's still there. And I do think that particular skill, that way of getting 99.9% out of everything, it probably allows you a little bit longer than the type of skill that's much more pointed and very delicate. So I've not surrendered on the idea that we could yet see him winning races again.
I think in a race-winning car.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's 46. It sounds ridiculous, and he's not in a race-winning car. To say, I think he's still got Grand Prix wins in him, but there's something in my head that says he has.
Yeah, I think you could probably point to the past 4 or 5 years, and maybe there's just a few more little mistakes, like the odd clipping another car in battle he might not have done. But this is not a constant, repetitive. No. He's not Pastor Maldonado doing it or anything. Yeah. So again, that's very, very small, little things. So yeah, what decline there is very, very minor, and that longevity actually. The argument you make there is compelling because it tells you why he's had that sort of longevity, because you need not only that adaptability but also that broad base skill set that allows you to be fast over a long period of time in all sorts of cars, even if some of your physiological skills might be very fractionally dulled, and we're talking probably fractions of a percent here.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be nice to see that theory tested, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I think I would love to see another win for Fernando Alonso, just because his last win was Spain 2013. 2013,
yes.
We were both there that day, and if you'd said to us he's going to do another however many 100 Grand Prix it is without winning one, you'd be like, what?
For the next 13 years he's going to be around, apart from when he takes a sabbatical, and he's not going to win any. He would just be so ridiculous.
It'd be astounding, wouldn't it? And in amongst all of that F1 success, he has also shown the adaptability. The Indy 500 could have won in 2017. I was there for the 2 weeks of that, and everybody working with him there was blown away by how diligent he was as well. In the simulator in the morning, then getting there for practice, and all of these things, how well he adapted, and he was playing out the race interestingly. And he'd actually, just because he'd led a bit, and then he'd been shuffled back a couple of places, he was trying to look after tyres and things, and then he just started to pick up. I'm convinced in that race he'd have been in the dust-up for victory. I don't know whether he'd have won it, but he'd have been right up there at the end and in with a chance of winning that race, plus the sports car success he's had. So he's shown in other areas. I remember when he went to do Indy, he said, well, I can't win 7 championships like Schumacher, so I've got to win in all sorts of categories. And that, I guess, adds to the legend. And all of the qualities that we've talked about feed into that diversity of success as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I don't think we're going to see his like for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. He has been absolutely remarkable. And I wouldn't use the word fans, but the level of appreciation for what Alonso does is right up there with certainly anybody I've covered in Formula One, and
totally.
I'm sure it'll be the same.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's it for this episode. If you're a race member, we'll be back soon with episode 2 on Kimi Raikkonen. If you're watching or listening to this and you are not a member, then head to patreon.com/The Race, or click the link in the episode description to sign up today. You'll get access to the full back catalogue of Driving Style Secrets, and also the 2 previous Q&A episodes that we've done. And we will be doing an end of series Q&A where you can ask us about the drivers we've talked about and any aspect of Driving Style Secrets. That's exclusively for members. So if you've enjoyed this on Fernando Alonso, perhaps you'll have a few questions you'd like to throw at us.